I'll probably get started. So thank you for coming on the very last session of the last day at 5 p.m. I'm hoping it's going to be worth your while to attend. My name is Chi. I'm from the I'm from Macquarie University over in Sydney, Australia. Alfresco's asked me to give a talk about how we've rolled out Alfresco, and I've touched on it a little bit during this morning panel session. But with this presentation, I'm hoping to go through a bit more in terms of some of the specific customization that we did at Alfresco and some of the key exercise that we went through in order to get the Alfresco deployment to where it is today. And the reason why I call it the Swiss knife at Macquarie University is because we built it initially for a particular purpose. But then as we look into the product and we discover more features, it's now becoming quite ubiquitous. It's actually being used in many, many different use cases for many critical business area within the university. So the outline of the talk will be, I'll give you a bit of a background about the university environment, our challenges and what we face. So if you're from an education environment, you're probably quite familiar with many of these problems that I'll talk about. Then I'll talk about the adoption, in particular how Alfresco is actually being used now once it's been rolled out, and why we chose Alfresco in the first instance. I'll also give you some statistics on how the adoption has been received at Macquarie Uni in terms of the number of documents and things like that. And I'll talk a lot about the customization. So there were a few key customizations that we did which were critical for us in order for us to get across the line and roll it out to the business users. And finally, I want to also talk about some of the key workflows and why that has been quite important in terms of transforming the university towards from a paperless way of doing things toward more process that are clearly codified with a clear audit trail and much faster turnaround time for many of our key processes. And I'll just close with some of the roadmap in terms of what we're currently doing at Macquarie University. Just a bit of context. Macquarie University is about 50 years old. So it was established in 1964. This year is our 50-year university. We have a train station, from the new train station to the city. It's about 20 minutes. So it's quite a convenient place. So if you ever come to Australia, Sydney, take a train out to Macquarie Uni. It's a pretty nice campus. It's located in an area which is like, it's a technology park. So within our campus, we have many new companies. So we have especially biomedical companies like Cochlear, which do the hearing aid for people. We also have the hearing hubs, and there's a lot of companies, especially around health and biomedical, are setting up their headquarters within the campus. We currently have 4 faculty structure, which are Faculty of Science, Human Sciences, Arts, and also the Faculty of Business Economics. But as of next year, we'll have a new faculty, which is the Faculty of Health Medicine. So so our new VC is very focused towards the direction of health and medicine. We have 10 campuses in 4 countries, and a third of our students are international students. Currently, we have approximately 40,000 students, and I'm not sure if it's the same with other universities, but we have a lot of control entities. So these are basically companies or or organizations which are set up and owned wholly by the university. So an example of that would be our graduate school of management. Soon we'll also set up a new preparatory kind of training college, so that people who go to this college will be able to get a placement within our bachelor program after they've completed that initial 2 years preparation. And we had a new VC, or not so new, but he's been here for over a year. And when he came in, he set up 7 key strategic priorities. And one of the key one is about how we need to improve our efficiency for back office. Oops, sorry. So when I started at Macquarie University about 3 years ago, and I'm sure this is very familiar with many of you, so we had a lot of information management challenges. So one was that the fact that we had very old technology. We still had Novell shared, would you believe? We had a lot of these island of informations, and people were having their little bespoken little repositories, or worse, portable drives and things like that. And it was very hard to manage access to that information. It was clearly not discoverable across the campus, for example. And in terms of managing the information life cycles, it was extremely difficult. And also, even if you use a shared drive like the Windows ADFS or something like that, this didn't allow people to have a clear view of a single source of truth. And the example of that would be, people would store their preparation for certain, budgets or meeting agendas and things like that within a team, but they keep on saving different file naming it version differently. And then you have a meeting, and then the dean will stand up and say, well, I'm not even sure this budget spreadsheet is the right one. The same thing happens if you're sending it through the email. After a few iterations of this review, it's like the single source of truth has been effectively lost. And one of the big challenges we always had, and still do to some extent, is that the fact that people are always going to go for convenience over compliance. So people will always email sensitive data even when you tell them don't do that because it's against the law. You shouldn't be putting email of student data over the, sending that over the email. People are still using portable hard drive because it's much easier to go down the shop when they need more storage, when instead they should be looking at how to preserve that information in a much more secure and durable way. And of course, you had the ease of use with, people also went off and used Dropbox and things like that. There was also a lack of resource because, making change to the system is quite costly. And of course, there's a lot of staff who are very resistant to change. So even now, we still have a lot of staff who much prefer to receive their student file in physical file rather than an electronic link and, be able to view that online. And I'm pretty sure it will be very similar to many other universities that many divisions and departments within the university are effectively autonomous units. They don't like to be told by central IT or by anyone really on how they should do certain things. So for example, we have a learning teaching group. They would run their own IT infrastructure for Moodle, and they would go off and set up their own instance of Aquila and that kind of thing. The library would go off and do their own thing. So it's very difficult, and it's a very decentralized environment that we had to work in. Of course, if you've been in a university or any large enterprise that's been around for a while, these pictures might look very familiar. So the other challenge that we had was this huge physical paper archive. So even if you even had a very nice secure storage, accidents do happen. And what happened here was that we had a flood, and then the whole basement was flooded, and the basement was where all these records were stored, and they got a lot of mold on them. And we, by law, have to keep these records for a certain amount of time. And that's what kicked off this whole project. But even if you find that the records are kept in nice compactors and everything, the fact that they're physical records have a lot of challenges in terms of making sure that the information is secure. So there's no way for you to ensure the integrity of that physical file that you're given to someone. They can take things out and remove things or add things that you don't know about. And it's also very hard to discover. Say if you get a subpoena asking for a certain piece of information in some text file, that's in one of the physical files, there's no way for you to be able to do a query across physical files to find that information. So we decided to approach from a point of view of trying to digitize things as much as possible, which is, whatever we have in physical form, try to, get funding and start digitizing it. And also for new information, try to stop it from source, turn that information and capture it in electronic form from the very beginning. So that flood was the catalyst for us to start on this journey of implementing Alfresco. So a little bit about why we chose Alfresco. I'm not sure if I'm talking to the converted crowd here, but you know, like we look at a few software, and Alfresco at the time, you know, it had a reasonably large user base. It was reasonably mature. You know, we look at some scalability studies, and it had no problem with dealing with hundreds of millions of assets. Even though it was open source, we like the fact that it has an enterprise support license. And it was, the most important for us was the fact that it was easily extensible and customizable. So the fact that we had access to the source code was a huge bonus for us. And you know, if anything happens, and worst come to worst, we still had the availability of, you know, getting some Java developers coming in, look at the code and fix that. And you know, that's really, really helpful for us. And of course, there's things that are unique to Alfresco that we couldn't find in any other product. Things such as the fact that it had aspects and behaviors, rules, and you know, the server-side scripting that is reasonably unique. And finally, we also have things such as the fact that it has a lot of different ways of accessing the repository. So you can access the repository via CIFS, via IMAP. You can send email to it, and you had cross-browser support, and of course you had that, you know, things such as the REST API and CMS support. So it has a plethora of different ways that you can interact and integrate with the repository. And the final thing would be the integrated workflow engine. So it's kind of unique in my opinion. I haven't really looked around too much, but I don't think there's many other, you know, a document management system where you are able to easily deploy a new workflow which is document-centric inside the system in a very short amount of time. So that it's going to be a very useful thing for us. So taking account of all these factors, that was the main reason why we went and chose Alfresco. So what does the deployment look like? So we called it Truth, okay? So that wasn't my choice. It was the previous CIO's choice, but it's basically, the product name is Truth. And we effectively sell it to people as everything inside the system, there's a unique link. And for every document, there's a link, okay? And it's meant to be the single source of truth for pretty much anything that you want to collaborate on, and also the single source of truth for documents and records. So that's really the main message that we wanted to tell our users when and why they should use the system. So first, so basically, you know, why is it a Swiss Army knife? So in terms of use case, we started with records management. But then we quickly switched from that over to document management as well, because there's no point waiting for people to make things into a record. You really need to actually capture things from source. If you're just waiting for people to say, oh, I want to declare things as a record, your record is not going to be very big. So what we want to do was to make sure that people follow best information management practices and try to do things the right way. And that includes the creation from its inception, make sure that it's being used. And the best way for that to happen is for them to adopt Alfresco as their document management system. Soon after that, then we also use, Alfresco is also used for auditing. So if someone comes up to us and say, show us who has accessed these files, these records, and things like that, we were able to use the auditing framework to comply with that. And of course, I mentioned about the workflows. Right now, in fact, for most of this year, my work has been around, supporting workflow, deploying new workflow, getting requirements on what are the workflows, those kind of things. So workflow has been coming like crazy for us in the last year, and I expect it to come even more next year. We also use Alfresco to support our freedom of information requests, or whenever we get to to comply with a subpoena or legal discovery as well, because of the fact that it has such a nice search engine. As an admin, you can search across the whole repository, search for specific metadata field based on student ID or student name, which we sync with the central university student system. or you can search for a specific key piece of information inside the text as well. So it does a full text indexing. And we recently also use it to publish certain piece of information. For example, say HR, they build up a repository within their area for position description so that they don't want people having to rewrite the new position description each time someone wants to advertise for a job. So they're building this, position description bank, but sometimes these things need to be updated. Maybe the pay scale changes or the division changed. They need to go through a review and approval process. So during that time, there's still the original PD that have been published, but what you want to be able to do is to say, okay, now it's been approved, it's been changed, and it's been approved, updated. Publish it to this other folder where it can be pulled in by the external website or any other web service platform in order to publish out to the public. And the same thing could be done for many, many other things such as forms, things that you want to disseminate, but you want to first keep it in-house, do the, your local review and editing before you push it out to the web. So these are the use cases that Alfresco is being used for at Macquarie University. In terms of the user group, this is just a small representative, and these are our key user group. But we have literally hundreds of different teams across the university using the system. So, for example, our student services system, they look after the student, admissions. They also looking after the student life cycle and the operational data, like the transcript and everything. So they use Alfresco to manage a lot of their day-to-day operation, especially with the admissions of the assessment of the student applications. I belong to the group called Strategic Planning Information, and one of our area of responsibility is central records. So in that space, we look after the student records, the higher degree research student records, the corporate record, the vital record, all the legal contracts that go through the lawyers, the research office contracts. So we have a lot of records that we need to look after, and that's why we are one of the key users of the system. HR users, so all our HR staff employee records are digitized and stored in the system. That was about 6 months project, so we had huge volumes of physical files, and we subcontract the digitization to a third-party company. After 3 months, they came back with all the files, and then we just did a bulk ingestion directly into Alfresco. We have all the 4 faculties, especially the admin staff, looking after that. So whenever they have the end of exam, they need to get the exam to be signed off by the dean, and he happens to be flying over to America somewhere. He can log in, do his signature or whatever, and say it's been approved, and then they can go and release the things. We have also our Macquarie International, which look after the international students. They are actually one of the biggest users of the system, because every day they're literally creating like 1,000 or 2,000 new documents coming in. And the reason for that is because they have a third party where the applicants go on and lodge their application to come study at Macquarie Uni. That system then effectively sends all that data to us via CMAS. So every day we're getting like 1,000 or 2,000 new documents being created. We have our graduate school management. We have tons of committees, and the committees are a very, they're a perfect use case for Alfresco, because if that was a shared drive, it would be impossible for any of committee members to be able to access the information in a timely manner, because they would have to ring up help desk and say, I'm from a faculty of science, I need to access to this committee thing, and another person from a different faculty, some of them are student body representatives and things like that. Whereas here, you basically set up a folder for that committee. You say who's the secretary for that committee. She has or he has the admin access over the whole folder, and bang, they just go off and manage the whole thing. And of course, once that everything is done, you can capture all that and turn that into a record very easily. We have all of the research office using it. PACE is also a very large. So PACE is responsible for making sure that every student get a placement in a company as part of the requirement for them to finish the study. They have to spend 6 months within an industry partner in order for them to qualify for the degree. And of course, the central informatics group as well. So the key thing here is that each of these separate units or groups, they are autonomous. They want to be able to manage the information their own way, and they want to see their own metadata, and they want to have things done their own way. But from a global, or like if you take a step back, we need to be able to find things when we need to in order to comply with things like subpoena and that kind of thing. And we also don't want, and we also want to capture this information as record as well. So currently, the adoption statistics are that we had 2,700 unique users logging into the system. That graph there shows you the number of assets being created since the system was launched in 2011. So now we're looking at about 10,000 new documents being created each week. And those huge spikes that you saw there, that you see on the graph, those represent the time when we do the huge migration. So we decommissioned system like Laserfish that had 300 gigabyte of data, and we had to do a blind reverse engineering of that product by hacking into its database, working out all the relationship of pages, and recompile the PDF, and then turning all that into actual PDF, and then we OCR'd it as well, and then we then upload them into Truth via the bulk ingestion. So those spikes there you see were when we did those migration from either the shared drive or from some legacy systems. And for me, this is the key thing. As long as that graph is growing and increasing, I'm happy. But if that graph is static, we get no new users, or the number of assets modified and created are just static, then that is a failed project in my opinion. So in terms of the what kind of area being used, so I'm not going to go through all the statistics here, but from the record management side of things, so central records, we have 75,000 different records. And so that 75,000 cover those boxes that we had in those very, in that flooded basement. And that company had to demold all 7 million pages of those things and digitize all that for us, and then gave us all the PDFs. So yeah, they did all the hard work. And we had the Macquarie International. They have 75,000 different student records. So this was over about 8 years. So these are all the applications and student records that they had acquired over that time. We had backscan about 6,578 HR records. So currently we have about 2,000 staff or something, like a bit more. But the 6,000 is also from staff from previous years, and that includes all the casual, anyone who basically just had a paycheck from the HR department. Property, they are a very big department looking after all the building maintenance. The university gone through and built new libraries and everything like that. So they have lots of records, a lot of drawing, lots of plans. All that has also been ingested into Alfresco. MGSM have about 4,000 records. We have Macquarie Applied Finance, which is a separate control entity looking after, sort of like a college in the city looking after a separate set of students. And the key one for us is also our lawyers. So they store all their legal matters inside Alfresco in a matter folder. So lawyers work with matters, so they basically create new matters every time they deal with a new contract or a new request for review or advice and things like that. And so all the matters from day one that I've been working on has been stored and has been kept in Alfresco. And of course, on the other side, you have people using Alfresco purely for document management. So we have tons and tons of files and folders from various divisions across the university. Some would actually use it purely in a web-based way of interaction, but other people like the lawyers or the informatics groups and things like that, they would use it via the CIFS protocol. Because these people, they often open up 10 Word document, Excel spreadsheet, filling up things like that. The last thing they want is having to download each of those things, make the change and upload the thing again, and having to remember to remove the leftover that's sitting on the desktop. So that's the main reason why we use CIFS. We didn't use WebDAV at that time, even though we do now, or we're still offering WebDAV as well. But early on, there was a lot of problem with WebDAV in terms of its, on how it, like the data wouldn't get corrupted and that kind of things, especially on a Mac. So we had to make sure that everything works both on the Mac, Windows, and possibly Linux as well to some extent. So this is quite, a large amount of material that we currently house in the one instance of Alfresco within the university. So just to give you an idea of some of the meta, so we, like a lot of our records and a lot of our data are very rich in metadata. And the reason for that is because we also sync with key operational system in the university. So there are really only a few of them actually. So one is, of course, the HR. So this is an example of a HR record. You can clearly see that it has a complete record of all their position IDs, all the title. I'll blank out the names, but it's there. So you have all their names, their preferred names, and their official name, and that kind of thing. And the same applies to the student record. We also sync with the student system to make sure that the moment they lodge a little piece of paper saying that I'm married and I want to change my surname, that information is then recorded in here as well. So we need to have all that, because if we get a subpoena saying, you know, find me if, give me all the records on Joe Blog, they wouldn't know what the student ID is. They would simply say Joe Blog. Now, if Joe Blog was from an overseas student, and they would often have an official name and, you know, and the other name as well. So these are the things that we have to deal with. So that's why it's very critical for us to get as much as possible the metadata from these authoritative sources of information for that. And of course, even though we scan all that information, the physical papers, we didn't throw all that away. We also look around and found a good company that, you know, was recommended by our state archive for looking after long-term storage. So the key thing here is that they will keep your boxes of files that have been scanned in a nice, secure location. It won't get flooded by the creek running, for example. And it's very cheap too. So the reason why these people make money is the moment you need to pull back a box or boxes, that's when they charge you, and the cost is relatively high. But of course, since we already digitize these things, we just simply want a way, just in case something happens to our electronic records, or if some scanning didn't work out, we are able to go back to them and ask them for that box to be retrieved, and, you know, say for a court requirement or something like that. So that's basically where we were, and that's where we are now. Okay, so in terms of the key customizations that we needed to do in order to get to where we were, and these are just some of them. We actually did a lot of customizations, and Alfresco probably doesn't like me to say it, but we, from day one, we built the whole thing from code. So even if we got the enterprise license, we still pull the whole source code from the enterprise license, which Alfresco has been kind enough to present to us. So we always build everything from that course. So we check all that source code into our own code base. We check all our own customization into our own code base. And so it allows us to quickly migrate to later version of Alfresco reasonably quickly. And, you know, so, you know, there was a lot of customization we did. So one of the ones I'm going to talk about is, in fact, it's really not a customization, but really the way we design our information is basically we don't use sites, for example. Another customization we did was we introduced this concept of a unique and persistent identifier for every single file and folder within our system. And another one is this concept of a bucket file plan. It's a horrible name, but I'll explain to you later and explain why we needed to make this customization. We also introduced this concept of or feature of how can you manage or delegate the group management to people, because it's really not efficient if you go around assigning people individually access to files and folders, because that's not going to be scalable. What you really want is to leverage group. But then if you do that, Alfresco currently only allow admin or repository administrator to manage those group memberships. So what we want to do was, how do you allow, you know, the nominated users within certain administration units or teams to be able to manage the groups that they use. And another key thing that we built on top of the Alfresco audit log is this audit log view. But there were, you know, a lot of other customization we did. For example, from day one, we didn't use a flash. That was 3 years ago. So when you download the Alfresco binary, you see there was a default flash thing. But at that time, Apple was already clearly indicated they weren't going to support flash, and we had to support iPad, iPhone, and things like that. So We had to rework the transformation server so that it generates a PDF instead of a Flash preview object, and we try to leverage things as much as possible, like, for example, the native HTML5, or sorry, the Chrome native PDF support and things like that. And the advantage of that is actually it reduced the amount of processing that needed to be done on the server, because no longer do you need to transform from a PDF to Flash and things like that. You can just download the PDF itself, which is going to be much quicker. So yeah, in terms of the unified file plan, so this is what we did. You notice here that the whole university information hierarchy is start from that top level Macquarie. It gets divided into administration, and unfortunately I cut it out, but when you collapse administration, below that are the 4 faculties, and also there's another group called control entities, which are the MGSM and things like that. And within administration unit, you see how it gets broken into, you know, a COO office. It's just a chief operating officer offices. This is the group that I belong in. Then you have all the other administration units. There's also another top level folder called digital archive, which is where the key area where the central records team store all the archives, all the records in there. But at the same time, within HR, they have their own record area as well. So I guess unique in many other, like when you see the Alfresco RM module, one of the constraints they have is that they can only have one single record site within an instance of Alfresco. We couldn't do that because our records, the governance of those records falls in different units. HR look after HR records. Property looked after property record. Central records look after these groups of records, but then, you know, that kind of thing. So we can't have a single record area managed by a single group. We had to actually have different records area. And under a record area, yeah, you can have different records type, like, you know, student record, corporate records, that kind of thing. But the governance and the policy of the university clearly state that this administrative unit will have administration over that area. And one of the key things that you notice up here is that we simply rely on the Google-like search. And the fact that you belong to this area, most likely you try to find document within that area. So you can just click on that drop-down list and select that as your default, and it will remember next time you search. So if you type a search string there, it will try to search only from that folder down. If you want to search across the thing, then yeah, you can default to the other thing and it will search across the whole repository. The other reason why we don't use Cite is because we had to use, we had to offer CIFS to people, and it was impossible to offer CIFS with Cite, because if you do that, then you either access only a small area, but you need to offer this interface to every staff who has access to Alfresco. So the only way for us to do that was to get rid of Cite and just simply offer the single CIFS mount point from the very top. And if you don't want to navigate all the way down the hierarchy, the cool thing about CIFS is that you can specify the path, and you do it once, you store it in your browser on your Windows, and you tell it to remember, and then next time you log in, it automatically goes directly to your team folder for you to work with. Finally, so this unique and persistent identifier. So first, I'm going to talk about why we needed this identifier. Okay, so very early on, we noticed that one of the problems is if you want to try to communicate someone a particular document or located document, this string is not human usable. You can't read this out. You can't tell it over the phone. But even more problematic is that it's not persistent. I'm not sure if that has changed in the recent incarnation of CIFS and things like that, because we no longer rely on that property to be persistent. But when we were doing testing, when you open a document over the CIFS interface, you make changes to the document, you save it, and that document had versioning enabled, the node ref changes. So if you send this link, okay, in an email to another person, when that person clicks on that node ref a couple of weeks or months or years later, it's gone. It's invalid. So it makes the whole accessibility, from a collaboration point of view, extremely bad. So what we did was then we had a concept of basically everything inside the system need to have a durable, which means that you edit the same thing over and over again, you move the things around, you rename the file. It has to be durable, and it has to be persistent for every file and folder within the system. It has to follow a RESTful API. So we came up with this, like this very short string, which is like almost like a database hash of what that original node ref was. So this is a hash of the DB, the actual thing. But we also add some extra piece to make sure that it's not only unique within the repository, but also globally unique, because we had a plan that if we were to set up another instance of federated Alfresco or something, we want to make sure that this ID is globally unique, not just unique within that particular database. Within that particular instance of Alfresco. And it followed the RESTful API. So for example, if you want to access a content of a document, you type in that URL. If you want to go to the document details or the folder detail, you simply add the /info at the end. If it was a document and you want to go to version 0.8, then you notice it's the same string there, but you type V, or you can type version, both works the same way, and then you type the version number. So, this allows us to build a very nice set of REST API that allow us to build a whole bunch of more services. And it's much more friendly to use than having to have the node ref with all the / in there. This work was basically commissioned with Alfresco Consulting Services, and the person who did that was Philippe Dubois, who's based over in France, I believe. So it was great. So, we gave the SOW to them within 1 month. Bang, we had the first prototype of this thing. We had to fix it a little bit to make sure that it works, and because it relies on rules, so things like transaction, all that had to be taken care of. And we also had to actually introduce to make sure that it's globally unique, because the original version wasn't globally unique. But other than that, it was a very nice, well-defined piece of work, not much money, and we have exactly what we wanted. So how does the unique identifier look in terms of there? So even though it's a very simple concept, it ended up being quite a lot of work in terms of rewriting share, because we also want, and it's not shown on here, but the address bar also had that URL. So if you go to document details, it won't say document minus details in the node ref. It will say share /ID /info. So we had to rewrite a lot of the share UI. It's not that hard, but it's just a bit tedious, and you do have to keep that in mind if you want to go forward, especially with the migrating to later versions of Alfresco, because Alfresco share naturally will still rely on that out of the box. But the key thing you can see there is that we have these links that people can copy, right-click, copy, and send to people. We also introduced this new mail link thing where you can, if you set up your browser to a default mail client, you can click on that link and it will automatically pop up the message with all the link pre-filled, and then you can type in the message, say, hey, Bob, please review this document, and then bang, away it goes. So you don't even need to copy that link. It also works within the folder listing. You can select a whole bunch of files or folders, and in the selected items, one of the actions is to mail all those files or folders as a set of links to be sent to other people. You can also, favorite them and then, store them as almost like a shopping cart, and then send those links into other people. So it's a very powerful way of collaborating, because now people didn't need to send the file attachment and you hit into things like file limits and things like that. Now you simply store everything into this central system, and then you send them the links to review. The same concept later I'll talk about is how a lot of our workflows is done. So you create a new application, and then bang, you send them a task with the link to where the folder of the application resides. And down the bottom here, you can see that these are all the URL that you can copy and send to people as well, following that full RESTful API. So that is a SV 0.8. So that's for version 0.8 of that document as well. So this is a very nice, very small piece of work, but it's very powerful in terms of how usable it is and how much it's changed our information management guides. So, okay, the next bit is a bucket file plan. So, the problem we have here is when we export things from Laserfish, or when we take things from people shared drive, and say it was 500,000 application that you need to now store in your system. How do you do that? Do you work out some ways of storing it based on student ID? But then what do you do if there's 500, or do you do based on their names, but then the S letter had 300,000, you know, that kind of problem. So what we found was that users don't actually browse these things. So if these were records, people don't browse record. They type in a record ID and they go directly to that record. So what I'm saying is they actually use search. They don't browse these things. They don't care where it is. As long as when they search for it, it shows up, they click on it, it goes there very quickly. So that's one of the key things that we want to do. And we also want to make sure that when we create rules, say if someone scanned a document and that document is for a student ID, they can use a keypad on the scanner to type in the student ID as part of the file name, and they can drop it into a particular folder. That folder can have a rule that automatically knows either to create a new student record for this student or put into the existing student record. So if we didn't have this automated creation API, we always have to work out where's the next place to put or create a new record without making this whole folder become unwieldy. Because if you're not careful, you can end up with 10,000, 100,000 children inside a given folder. So that's why we decided to have this very generic API. We call it a bucket. So a bucket is like, it could be a record, it could be an application. So a bucket just holds things. But we need to be able to manage that layout in such a way so that it's not going to slow down when you click inside the share interface to access that particular record. So our solution is to create a bucket, which is an abstraction of a record or anything that requires automatic filing. A bucket file plan is simply consisting of a bucket root, which is, so if you use record as an example, that would be the top record area or the root folder of all your records. And under that particular bucket root, you have a bucket type. So again, going back to the records, that would be your record type. So things that sit under the same bucket type would say the same record type. And they would typically share the same disposition schedule or something like that. And finally, at the very end, somewhere along in this parent child hierarchy, you end up with the actual record itself. And the key thing with our bucket leaf is that it needs to have a unique identifier that is unique within that whole record area so that you can find it. Okay, so how does it look like? So the top level there is a bucket root. Then you can see those are the bucket types. There could be a student record area, it could be the vital record, it could be the corporate record types. Okay. Now, at the start, it's fine. So as you're creating from beginning, you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, up to 100 folders. That's not going to cause any problem. Now, what happened when you create the next, like someone add a new student record? What happens is that the API, or sorry, the service that we built automatically creates a sibling folder and automatically moves it into the next thing. And it checks it. And of course, when this level get up to 100, it automatically creates another parent folder and move all that underneath as well. So it does all that in a transactional way. So you don't have to put some rules in and worry about whether the rules, transaction, ordering happen. This allows you to simply so this service is available both as a JavaScript API, so you can access and write script and use it, say create new bucket leaf, find bucket leaf, and things like that, and be assured that it's transactional when you do it. Or you can do it as a web script. So you can send a web script call from a remote system saying, I want to upload a call, and I want to create a new record, basically. And it will take care of exactly where to put that record. And in terms of searching, all you need to do is go to that search box, type in the student ID in the search box, and bang, you go directly into that record folder for you to see. And the good thing about this is we can have many of these bucket root areas. So one bucket root could be the HR records, another bucket root could be the central records, and so and so. So yeah, so the key thing there is that we actually talk directly to database via CAN query. We don't rely on Lucene or Solr because the fact that it needs to be transactional. Okay, so the other problem we had, as I mentioned before, was this, how do you delegate the group management? Because, okay, new group creation is actually not too bad. We don't often get a lot of requests to create new groups within Alfresco. But what we do get a lot of requests is especially for committees and a lot of teams, they have new members and things like that constantly. And what we don't want is to have them to wait, us to action on their requests. We want them to be able to do that themselves. Otherwise, it's not really any better than the old shared drive where they had to file a ticket and things like that. So I think what we do here is a bit of a hack, and I'm waiting for Alfresco, and I've requested Alfresco to do this, is to introduce the idea of nominate people to manage certain groups within thing. But until that happens, we have to go this way. And the way we did was basically, for each administration unit, we asked them, okay, you nominate to us who are the people that you want to manage your group. So if it was a large faculty, they would have a local IT team. And so the logical people would be the IT team for that, like the local IT group there. But if it was a small team, then it could be 1 or 2 people within that team that they want to manage their group. And then what we do is we allow them to, so we create them the text file, but we give them the permission to change that text file. And what we do is on a regular basis, we have a cron job that runs at admin level, simply checks on any file that have changed and simply change the group, and bang, that's it. So, what's happened is that now you only change a group, and 15 minutes later, the people have access to the files that you want. So this is extremely useful because now they can manage all the permission themselves and manage the groups themselves. So I think it was a pretty cool thing that we did. So even though it took me like, half an hour to do, but it was, it's just the kind of illustration of the kind of flexibility that Alfresco offers. And finally, the main thing we also did was the audit log. So, okay, so there's the audit filtering, the auditing framework in Alfresco is available, but it didn't come with any default filter that's usable and things like that. Or there's no way for you to be able to let the end user see who has access files. What we wanted to do was to make sure that if you were the administrator for a given file or folder, you want to let those people be able to see who has access to files, when they access the file, whenever any modification happens to any of the file, and whenever any permission has changed as well, not just changes to the file. So to that end, we utilize the auditing framework from Alfresco and develop all the necessary extractors and all the share module to enable to create that audit view. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So if you're familiar with Alfresco core services, they have these fundamental things like the node service, the file folder service, the content service, thumbnail service, and permission service. What the auditing framework allowed you to do was effectively put in these interceptor at certain API or certain method calls so that you can record those events. So we just simply look at the events that we want to record the information for, develop the extractor so that we pull out the right information, such as who, if it was a change in the metadata, what were the original metadata properties and what were the new metadata properties. If someone did an access, so that would typically trigger a thumbnail generation, so that's recorded as an access as well. If someone changed the permission, we want to record that change in permission by putting in the filter at those service level as well. So after we did that, you can see here that we modified the share UI to add those little action to people who have administrator role to a file or folder. So in this case, it's a file, and that action is available to the coordinator of that file. When you click on that action, it pops up this modal dialog that you can scroll and see the whole history of all the change that has happened to that file. So you can see that the admin user did a read of that file at this time, and previously they created the file and they added all these properties and things like that. So it was just a very simple, easily understood UI that allow anyone who are the administrator to be able to see how the changes are made. I think I'm going a bit too much over time, but I'm going to. Okay, so finally, the other thing I quickly want to show you is the benefit of using the integrated Activiti. What we found that is Activiti is ideal for being able to drive document-centric business processes. And there's tons of these within the university. And the good thing with Alfresco is that it allows us to create the rules and consolidate all the information into a given folder. And of course, you get all the benefit like versioning and customizable metadata and things like that, and you can get the form for free. But the most important thing for me is the fact that when you talk to these people, a lot of the processes in their minds, and different people have different concept of what is the workflow. But once you actually sit down and get all the requirement and you put it into an XML, like a BPMN thing, that's it. That's black or white. You either agree on this one or you don't. And having that diagram there really helps because it shows them what's available. And you can utilize the JavaScript side of things. So these are some of the workflow that we did. So the first one we did was a very complex workflow for freedom of information. And the reason why this was so complex was because there's legislative requirement on how long we are allowed to sit on a given freedom of information request, which is about 14 days. And you need to clearly show at which point of the thing who did what and when. So that if you get pulled up by the ombudsman, you need to show to them, hand on the Bible saying, yes, these were the actions that I took, that kind of thing. And this is what our screenshot looked like. So you can start the workflow, get all the metadata, and then here you can see that it automatically creates all these folders where the Freedom of Information Officer can go in and file. So the moment you kick off workflow, it automatically creates a unique folder for that case, and that's where you can go in and put all the relevant information in different places. But the good thing about the workflow is that you don't actually have to use a form that's built inside Alfresco because often that's not sufficient. It's actually quite bad in terms of multi-value properties and things like that. So you can leverage an external form. So here we used an external application, form application for student to apply to go to the university. And that actually, the moment they press submit, we use CMIS to programmatically kick off a workflow inside Alfresco. And that's what the workflow is. It's basically an application to go to for the early offer program. And all the metadata that they type on the form is automatically recorded in here. And you have the benefit, and you're not restricted by the form control and widgets that's available within Alfresco. And we have a lot of these workflows. So far, we rolled out about 5 to 6 of these. And the latest one, we're going to have about 10,000 applications per year. So that's 10,000 workflow instances for the postgraduate one. We have the one where people go around and negotiate agreement with other universities for co-tutel or joint PhDs or I don't know what other thing, exchange program. They need to manage all those processes because they need to be signed by the Dean of International so-and-so and so-and-so. And so we need to make sure that they can manage all that properly. So in terms of roadmap, really at the moment it's just workflows and workflows and workflows. But we did all those workflows in the space of between 2 weeks to 4 weeks. From the moment we actually got the request, that includes requirements gathering, development, deployment, and actually rolling it out. So most of those workflows were done within 2 to 4 weeks. And the most challenging bit is actually getting people to agree on what that process should be because different people have different understanding of it. We're also working on the automatic OCR of content, so a lot of things inside our system, because not everyone have access to a scanner that can do OCR. So we want to be able to automatically, on the background, start turning everything that's a PDF that hasn't been OCR'd into an OCR PDF. We want to move to Alfresco 5 because it's great. Like Outlook integration and MS Office SharePoint protocol, that would be a killer feature for us. I can get rid of CIFS for once. And we want to use reporting analytics. And of course, the faceted search and thing. I don't know what's going on with desktop sync, but I really wanted that, but I don't know. They said it was coming, but I think it's being pulled back to late next year. And we also aim to scale our asset to about 10 million, which I predict will be happening next year, given the rate that we're going. Right now, we're seeing it close to 2 million, but I think the fact that we keep on getting so many requests to migrate different departments and their shared drives onto Alfresco is going to be around that 10 million target by the end of next year. So sorry, I went over time, so thank you.